Welcome back to the Naughty Corner. Let's get straight into it. The following passage is from paragraph 42 of the report's executive summary. On March 2nd, police employed the following: skirmish lines, shields, empty-hand tactics including pushing and striking, pepper spray, batons, weapons of opportunity, fire extinguishers, fire hoses and paving bricks, deflating tyres and sponge rounds. That sets quite the tone for this episode, considering the last couple of chats we've shared showed the report stressing negotiation and a return to peace as major police aims. Aside from one potentially fictional account of protesters pissing in a public water feature and then bathing in it, there was very little untowards them in the report so far either. So what happened on March the 2nd and what caused it? According to the report, on Wednesday the 2nd of March 2022, police began a large-scale operation to restore Parliament grounds and environs to a safe state of a peaceful, lawful protest. Keep this in mind because by the end of it, you'll be wondering how a peaceful or lawful protest was restored in any way whatsoever. They received over 250 complaints about the police's use of force when dealing with the protesters on the 2nd of March. The vast majority of these were from people who witnessed incidents on television or social media. They received 22 complaints from individuals alleging that police had used unjustified or unreasonable force on them personally. In a chart following on from paragraph 625, we're given a breakdown of the day's actions and objectives from the police perspective. So we'll run through that now. At 6 AM, a police helicopter starts circling above the protest site. Police also begin broadcasting warning messages from the roof of Parliament House and Atkins Street using LRADs, long-range acoustic devices. The warning informs that Parliament grounds and Atkins Street are closed and that anyone remaining there will be trespassing. 6:10 to 6:40 AM, police clash with protesters but move them down Hill Street towards the intersection of Hill, Molesworth and Atkins Streets. Police also commence a planned operation to clear roads surrounding Parliament by towing vehicles, starting in Molesworth Street. 6:45 to 8 AM, police clear Atkins Street and begin clearing Molesworth Street. Police and protesters clash in front of the Court of Appeal. Police use an LRAD to warn protesters to step back and those that do not comply are pepper sprayed. 8 to 9:40 AM, the LRAD message, formally informing that Parliament grounds and Atkins Street are closed, is changed to include trespass warnings for Molesworth Street and other streets surrounding Parliament. We'll pause here just briefly to point something out. The police began clearing Molesworth Street and clashed with protesters in front of the Court of Appeals prior to the LRAD message being changed to revise trespass warnings for Molesworth Street. With 3 weeks of planning and reflection since February the 10th, the police again assaulted citizens prior to giving them proper trespass warning. One could argue that protesters had been trespassing since their warning on the 10th of February, but if you recall our episode covering that event, we discussed how a warning under Section 4 of the Trespass Act needed to be issued to ensure that protesters remained off Parliament property, and that was not issued to the vast bulk of people involved. As the report tells it, police made 95 arrests on the 2nd of March with charges predominantly for trespass and obstruction. They cite the following quote without attributing it, but it appears to be from an officer. Even on the 1st of March, it was still really unclear what people were going to be charged with. Someone was saying obstruction, someone was saying trespass. So in the end, on the 2nd of March, all 95 people were charged with both, which created its own set of problems. 9:40 AM to 2:40 PM, police and protesters remain in the same position on Molesworth Street while other police officers remove protesters' property and vehicles from the cleared area. By 12:15 PM, 38 arrests have been made. 1:30 to 2:35 PM, police leadership have discussions and make decisions, but little actually happens. 2:40 to 3:10 PM, one police team begins clearing Parliament grounds using skirmish lines, pepper spray and fire extinguishers. They clear the area immediately inside Parliament's main gate by 3:04 PM. A second police team advances down Molesworth Street through heavy opposition, including objects thrown and petrol sprayed at them. They clear the area outside the gate by 3:07 PM. An LRAD is moved to Parliament forecourt and continues issuing warnings. 3:15 to 3:30 PM, police clash with protesters in front of the main gate but manage to advance, while others advance on the main camp area inside Parliament ground and begin clearing tents and property. The timeline continues, but we'll cover the remainder of what transpired that day in our next episode. Suffice to say, for many the protest ended at this point, violently dispersed by the government's foot soldiers. Obviously, during all this there was a lot of vigorous police and protest interactions, but if you've been following our series you'll know the drill. They've been brushed over and barely mentioned at all in the IPCA report. They received 27 complaints from protesters who were standing close to the skirmish lines about police using shields against them. They're independently investigating one of these matters. They received hundreds of complaints about officers using empty-hand tactics on protesters on the 2nd of March. Most of these were from complainants watching events unfold on television and social media. They are investigating 4 specific incidents involving officers' use of empty-hand tactics on complainants. Having reviewed the complaints and footage of the 2nd March operation, they found that overall, police's use of empty-hand techniques was justified under Section 48 of the Crimes Act. self-defense. Now, given that almost all of the arrests at this point in the day were for trespassing and obstruction, they don't give a breakdown, I'm not sure how easily you can simply justify these incidents being complained about as self-defense, but that's what they've done. Because of this, there's not a lot we can discuss about actual incidents of unacceptably violent conduct in the conduct report itself. You can of course use your own eyes and judge for yourself whether the clips being played in the background look like self-defense. But if you're a bit skeptical, that's on you, not me. There are, however, a couple of interesting topics that come up in this section of the report. Some officers told the IPCA they thought the planning for the operation to clear the area around Parliament was too heavily influenced by the Armed Defenders Squad and Special Tactics Group, rather than public order policing. You see, police policy describes using officers wearing PPE, that is personal protective equipment, as a significant show of force, which requires sufficient justification. The use of PPE is not acceptable for peaceful demonstrations, but is justified in cases of riot and serious disorder where the equipment is needed to protect officers from injury. The Crimes Act includes provisions about the use of force to suppress a riot. A riot is defined as a group of 6 or more persons who, acting together, are using violence against persons or property to the alarm of persons in the neighbourhood of that group. At 8:30 AM, the Tactical Commander did approve a reserve PSU squad, that is Police Support Unit, to change into hard body armour, and about an hour later approval was given for them to carry long batons. Remember, there was no mention of any violent opposition from the protesters until at least 2:40 PM. Also recall from our episode about February the 10th that batons and weapons of opportunity like fire extinguishers are a step above pepper spray on the scale of employable force usable by police. It's a 5 out of 6 alongside tasers and dogs, with the next and final step up being firearms. How is the occupation of Parliament on the morning of the 2nd of March not peaceful prior to the arrival of police presence? I imagine most of them were still asleep at 6 AM when it all kicked off. Certainly prior to the police donning their PPE, it didn't fit the legal definition of a riot. This looks like a case of treating it as a riot until it became a riot, and the report itself attests to this in paragraph 691 stating, as the day progressed, the clearance of Parliament grounds and the surrounding areas became increasingly violent and ultimately turned into a riot. I mentioned fire extinguishers earlier because the reviewed footage also shows police officers spraying fire extinguishers one after the other at protesters standing up on the wall beside the gate. The authority received a complaint about this use of force, which is the subject of a separate investigation and report to the complainant. As it turns out, not all police felt opposed to the significant show of force that was the wearing of PPE. One officer told the IPCA, "I think it would have started us off in a completely different mindset or image if we'd all rolled in with batons." I think you only have to cast your mind back to the Springboks of how that was, what that image is, and what it looks like, and what it feels like for people. I'm not sure invoking the use of force during the Springbok tour is a great look, since history's come out on the side of the protesters in that instance. Very few today would support hosting a country that practices apartheid. It's not an altogether inappropriate comparison either, because apartheid translates as apartness, something people were protesting in 1981 and a significant part of what was being protested by the Convoy in 2022. Another interesting aspect that the report comments on is the use of pepper spray. They received 22 complaints about police using pepper spray and are independently investigating the circumstances of one of these, which alleges police sprayed pepper spray directly into the eyes of one of the protesters while he was on the ground being arrested. Footage from the 2nd of March showed protesters administering their own treatment by pouring water and milk on their faces. The Wellington Free Ambulance were available on site, and Fens also had a decontamination tent. Only one protester was recorded as having been offered treatment for pepper spray by the Wellington Free Ambulance, and they refused it. This isn't really surprising, given it was emergency service workers that were assaulting them and had been harassing them for almost a month. You might consider the use of pepper spray appropriate, you might feel it was unjustified, particularly considering canisters were fired into an encampment containing children. More interesting, however, is that the police policy regarding its use was changed just one day earlier. On the 1st of March, police policy was updated to approve the use of MK9 canisters, larger and with greater range than their previous MK3 standard canisters, and amended the section about the use of pepper spray in crowds. Before the 1st of March 2022, the policy said, as a general rule, pepper spray should not be used in a crowded situation. However, it can be used against more than one person at a time if circumstances justify this. The policy now says, when the circumstances justify its deployment, pepper spray can be utilised against more than one person at a time. The use of pepper spray in crowded situations should consider the potential for cross-contamination of both subjects and staff due to overspray. The new policy also changed the mandatory requirement that an officer minimise the spray's effect by providing decontamination and aftercare, to require that an officer plan to provide it, or access to it only if the circumstances allow. That is why the IPCA could comfortably say they found an appropriate level of aftercare treatment was available to protesters. Alongside the changing in policy to enable a more liberal use of pepper spray and the early donning of PPE gear and batons, the report keeps banging on the drum that negotiation was the police's go-to option. Police policy identifies tactical communication as the preferred option for resolving incidents requiring a police response, because the goal is to de-escalate the situation and remove the need to use any force. From paragraph 748, police attempts to end the occupation through negotiation with the protesters had been unsuccessful. However, communication remained a key tactic for the 2nd of March operation, in the form of providing the crowd with clear warnings and direct instructions. The unsuccessful attempts referred to here being the single meeting the police negotiation team attended on the 20th of February. Another problem brought up in this section of the report is the admission that police did not record their use of force in the manner legally required. Police officers who have used force must complete a tactical options report which explains their decision making and their justification for using the force. The TOR must be completed within 72 hours of the incident and is reviewed and signed off by both a supervisor and inspector. However, the tactical commander for the 2nd of March operation told officers that due to the scale of the operation and the number of officers involved, he would prepare a single global TOR which was intended to cover all uses of force. Then, 3 months later on the 1st of June 2022, police instructed officers to complete individual TORs for specific incidents in which force was used on the 2nd of March. Wellington District's Operations Support Manager advised senior staff that this was to support the authorities' inquiry into how police dealt with the occupation at Parliament and was an important part of keeping police accountable and transparent. This seems like it should be a considerable problem for an entity charged with reviewing conduct, because if the conduct isn't properly recorded, you can't really assess it. The report, however, ultimately approves the police's conduct while addressing this concern briefly in paragraph 737 as follows. After reviewing the footage from the 2nd of March, we believe the police underreported their use of force and the information required to be captured was incomplete. Though the IPCA found police conduct on the 2nd of March acceptable, not every governing body mentioned in the report did. Tracking back to an earlier section, the one covering negotiations, we find the Maori government's response to the events of the day recorded as follows. On the 2nd of March, the Maori government sent a letter to campsite leaders at Parliament grounds which many protesters saw. This stated that the police negotiating team had contacted the leader of the Maori government on the 28th of February requesting assistance to resolve the situation in Wellington, and the Maori government had engaged in good faith with protest representatives on the 1st of March. The letter states an agreement was reached to hold a hui over the weekend of the 4th to the 6th of March with police to discuss a peaceful resolution, and part of the agreement was that no hostile action would be undertaken. The Maori government letter went on to say, when the Commissioner ordered police to use force, this was a direct breach of this agreement, an act of bad faith and a violation of their oath to protect people. With that, we'll close out the first half of our March 2nd breakdown, and I'll catch you next time as we conclude analysing the events of that disturbing day.